For more than a century, the United States treated the eradication of predators as a matter of course. Wolves were shot, poisoned, bountied, and wiped off the national map with a clear objective: to protect people, livestock, and the order built by modern society. And for decades, this was believed to be a victory. Yet in 1998, the United States did something that ran completely against that logic. Instead of continuing to eliminate risk, the federal government deliberately reintroduced a predator once regarded as the #1 enemy, the Mexican wolf. Not in some distant wilderness, but right in Arizona and New Mexico, places where people live, raise livestock, and contest land every single day. Why did the United States choose to bring wolves back? What forced a nation to accept living alongside a predator it had once tried so hard to erase? Terran Works will reveal it all in this video. You know, in Japan, before wolves went extinct, they were once regarded as guardian spirits of villages. In contrast, in the United States, the history of wolves has been defined by elimination. In the American West, a single sheep carcass left on a pasture is enough to reignite debates that have lasted for more than a century. Wolves are not seen as part of nature, but as a sign that humans are losing control over the land they inhabit. As ranching systems expanded, every appearance of wolves was translated into economic risk and social instability, something that had to be removed in order to preserve the human-designed order. These concerns are not entirely unfounded. In areas where Mexican wolves are present, official figures show that wolves do indeed attack livestock, with 111 confirmed incidents in 2023 and 99 in 2024. In fact, these numbers are likely lower than reality, as determining the exact cause of livestock deaths across vast open rangelands is often extremely difficult. However, when it comes to direct threats to humans, fear often runs ahead of the data. Ecological reports do not identify wolves as a primary cause of attacks on people. Even so, the image of a fanged predator living near human settlements is enough to generate deep unease within rural communities. It was precisely this view of wolves as a sign of loss of control that pushed the United States into an even more extreme phase, turning the eradication of wolves into formal policy. These were not isolated actions by individuals or local communities, but an organized, sustained campaign backed by the state. From the colonial period through the late 19th century, bounties on wolves were a common practice across many Western states. Each wolf killed did not only bring a financial reward, but was also seen as proof that the land had been tamed. A nationwide turning point came in 1915, when the federal government established the Biological Survey, the predecessor of today's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, with a clear mandate to eliminate predators considered threats to livestock and economic development. From that moment on, wolf hunting was no longer a matter of choice, but a land management strategy. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, wolves were pursued nationwide with rifles, steel traps, and poison. As a result, by the mid-20th century, wolves had virtually disappeared from most of their historical range across the contiguous 48 states. A species that once roamed widely across North America was reduced to scattered remnants, surviving only in the most remote regions. Among the wolf populations most severely affected by the nationwide extermination campaign, the Mexican wolf stands out as both the most emblematic and the most tragic case. As the smallest subspecies and the southernmost range of the North American gray wolf, the Mexican wolf once roamed widely across the deserts, mountains, and forests of southern Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. It was well adapted to arid climates, but that adaptability was no match for an organized campaign of persecution that lasted for decades. From the early 20th century, Mexican wolves were hunted using the very same methods that had wiped out other wolf populations: bounties, private hunters, government-hired gunmen, steel traps, and poison. By the 1940s, the subspecies had been almost completely eliminated from the United States. The few remaining individuals avoided human contact and were rarely documented in the wild. By the late 1960s, even reports of Mexican wolf sightings had become exceedingly rare. In 1970, the last wild Mexican wolf in New Mexico disappeared, bringing an end to the subspecies' existence in the wild on U.S. soil. At the time, few regarded this as an ecological loss. For many, it was simply the final chapter in the removal of a threat that had persisted for far too long. The extinction of the Mexican wolf did not create a loud or dramatic void. It unfolded in silence, and the ecosystems of the American West changed just as quietly. With no apex predator at the top of the food chain, populations of deer and elk began to increase rapidly. For decades, they were largely free from natural predation pressure, and the consequences first appeared in the vegetation. In river valleys and lowland areas, herbivores gathered in ever greater densities. They stripped young shoots bare, preventing the regeneration of species such as willow, poplar, and birch. Saplings failed to grow, riparian forests thinned, and the plant cover that once held the soil in place began to disappear. When roots could no longer stabilize riverbanks, erosion intensified, stream flows became unstable, and the quality of aquatic habitats declined. These changes triggered a cascade of further effects. Species that depended on riparian forests lost their habitats, most notably beavers, animals that had once played a crucial role in regulating water and creating wetland environments. As beavers declined, ponds and wetlands vanished, groundwater levels fell, and the entire landscape's capacity to retain water diminished. Only when these transformations spread and persisted did scientists gradually realize that eliminating the Mexican wolf had not merely removed a predator, but had broken a key mechanism of natural control. And then, after years of ecosystems sliding out of balance, the final thread of hope lay south of the border. Between 1977 and 1980, the last remaining wild Mexican wolves were captured to establish a captive breeding program. From just 7 founding individuals, the entire small population of Mexican wolves was rebuilt. In 1998, the United States made a controversial decision to reintroduce the Mexican wolf into the wild. 13 wolves were released into the Blue Range area, spanning Arizona and New Mexico, marking the first time in nearly 3 decades that wolf howls returned to this landscape. From then through 2023, the program continued steadily, with 195 wolves released across 67 different groups. By the end of 2024, the Mexican wolf population in the United States had grown to at least 286 individuals, including wolves born in the wild. For scientists, this represents a significant step forward, but for many local communities, it signals the return of an old fear. The reintroduction program is not merely an effort to restore a lost species. It is a tense test of whether society is willing to confront and repair ecological mistakes, even when the cost remains deeply contested. The reintroduction of the Mexican wolf did not produce immediate changes. The earliest shifts unfolded slowly and began primarily with the behavior of prey species. As wolves returned, deer and elk no longer moved and fed as freely as they once had. They began to avoid river valleys and open areas where the risk of predation was higher. It was this change in behavior, rather than sheer population numbers, that generated cascading ecological effects. Along riverbanks, where young plants had previously been relentlessly grazed, vegetation was finally given a chance to recover. Species such as willow and cottonwood, which had long struggled to survive their vulnerable early stages, began to reappear in greater densities. Riverbanks became better protected, erosion declined, and stream flows grew more stable. The return of wolves did not simply alter a single species, it helped restore a chain of natural controls that had once been broken. Yet, just as the signs of ecological recovery began to grow more visible, conflict with humans intensified more than ever. For many ranchers in Arizona and New Mexico, the impact of wolves is not measured by the return of vegetation or the stability of riverbanks, but by the number of livestock lost. Each sheep or calf left dead on the rangeland is not only a direct economic loss, but also a reminder that a predator once eliminated has now returned. The conflict therefore revolves not only around damage, but around a sense of lost control. One side sees ecosystems slowly recovering through the return of wolves. The other faces an increasingly tangible risk to its livelihood. At this boundary, the Mexican wolf has become a symbol of a deeper tension between long-term ecological benefits and the short-term costs that people must bear. And that is why, even with wolf numbers still relatively low, the debate over their presence has never cooled. Alongside conflicts with livestock, the Mexican wolf population faces a less visible but existential challenge: genetics. Every Mexican wolf alive in the United States today descends from just 7 founding individuals brought into a captive breeding program in the late 1970s. This created what biologists call a genetic bottleneck, in which genetic diversity is reduced to dangerously low levels. The consequences of this limited genetic base did not appear immediately, but accumulated quietly over time. Scientists have documented lower reproductive success, weaker immune systems, and a higher risk of genetic defects. The problem is compounded by the fact that many wolves in the wild live in scattered groups, making it difficult to find unrelated mates and allowing inbreeding cycles to persist. To address this, scientists have been forced to intervene directly. One key strategy is pup fostering. Wolf pups born in captivity are placed into wild wolf dens when they are only a few days old. By 2023, 83 pups had been successfully fostered and raised entirely in the wild. While this approach offers hope, it also exposes a paradox. To restore a wild species, humans must intervene more deeply than ever in its natural processes. As a result, today's Mexican wolf population is not merely the product of reintroduction, but the outcome of a fragile balance between nature and science. If the Mexican wolf population represents a test of biology and ecological restoration, then the story of the red wolf pushes that challenge even further, into a space where science, law, and politics collide head-on. It is a stark example of how a species can be driven to the brink of extinction, not only by direct human impact, but also by prolonged disputes over its very identity. Once widespread across the southeastern United States, the red wolf declined rapidly during the 20th century and was declared extinct in the wild in 1980. Only a small group of individuals survived in captive breeding programs. In 1987, the United States began reintroducing red wolves into the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge in North Carolina, launching one of the nation's earliest predator reintroduction projects. However, recovery efforts soon ran into a scientific controversy that would last for decades. Whether the red wolf is a distinct species or merely a hybrid of the gray wolf and the coyote. This debate did not remain confined to academia. It spilled into court cases and policy decisions, repeatedly stalling the recovery program and creating long-term management instability. The consequences are reflected clearly in the numbers. By 2020, the wild red wolf population had fallen to only about 8 individuals, an all-time low that pushed the species to the edge of a second extinction. Only after the U.S. National Academy of Sciences recognized the red wolf as a distinct species in 2019 did the recovery program regain a firm scientific foundation to move forward. As a result, the red wolf population began to grow again. By 2025, there were an estimated 28 to 31 adult wolves and 10 to 12 pups in the wild. Even so, these numbers remain extremely fragile. The story of the red wolf reveals a clear paradox. Even when science finds answers, the fate of a species still depends on human choices and attitudes. The stories of the Mexican wolf and the red wolf reveal a difficult truth. Restoring a top predator is not merely a biological challenge, but a test of how humans understand their role in nature. The United States once believed that eliminating wolves was the path to protecting order and livelihoods. Yet decades later, it was precisely that absence that exposed consequences no fence or control measure could truly fix. Bringing wolves back does not deliver a neat or complete ending. Instead, it opens new conflicts and unresolved questions. Between conservation and livelihoods, between control and coexistence, every choice carries a cost. What do you think about this issue? Leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next journeys with Terran Works.